Barber.
Here. Having a quorum, I will call to order the meeting of the Metropolitan Council Transportation Committee for October 26, 2020. Our first order of business is approval of the agenda. If there are no changes or additions to the agenda, we can proceed without a roll call vote. Are there any changes or additions to the agenda? Seeing and hearing none, we will approve the agenda. Next, we're on to approval of the minutes, and they're the minutes from the October 12th, 2020 meeting of the Transportation Committee. Were there any changes or additions to the minutes? All right, seeing none, I'd entertain a motion to approve the minutes.
Cummings moves approval.
Moved by
Fredson,
Cummings
second.
and second by Fredson. Is there any other discussion? Hearing none, Becky, could you call the roll, please?
Chambliss.
Aye.
Cummings.
Aye.
Ferguson.
Aye.
Fredson.
Aye.
Gonzalez. Sterner.
Aye.
Zirin. Barber.
Aye. And with that, the minutes are approved. Our next order of business is the tab report. We have Mr. Dugan here. You're on mute. I'm sorry. There you go. Go ahead.
I was hoping you were going to mute me. That'd be the best. There for the afternoon. Okay, it's been a long 7 months, hasn't it? Oh boy. Good afternoon, Madam Chair, Madam Vice Chair, honorable council members, General Manager Koistra, Director Thompson, and Becky. As always, thanks for setting this up. You on your consent agenda today, you have two items which are both streamlined amendments to the TIP, and I'll just give 30-second overview. The first is the MBTA Burnsville Bus Garage renovation, and the second is, and that's in Council Member Sterner's jurisdiction, and the second is a signal replacement in Chanhassen on Highway 169 in the Chair's district. They are both, as you know, the TIP is a list of all federally funded projects, and the reason these are a streamlined TIP is because there are no regional solicitation funds involved. In the garage, it's the Federal Transportation Administration funds, and in the and in the signal replacement, it is highway rail crossings and rail safety funds. The first item that TAB considered was the transportation policy plan, and I will not dwell on that because you will be having a presentation on November the 9th. However, I will say that in preparation for that, there have been substantive changes to the TPP, in part due to public comments, and the public comments were associated with three general themes: one, reducing roadway expansion; two, transportation improvements to improve equity; and three, the parking policy of the metro to be done in best practices. The intent here is to reduce carbon emissions and congestion. However, I would like you to note that there were concerns voiced by several TAB members as to the outlying counties with growing populations and how they will be served. The Madam Chair can get you, or Director Thompson can get you access to this, but there was a well-done tracked changes overview by Amy Venowitz, which has all of the major themes and changes. In addition, the overview section of the TPP is red line. So you'll see yellow sections, which are new, and then red lines. So if that is something you'd like to do before the November 9th meeting. The other major item of discussion was the funding, the regional solicitation draft funding scenarios. And so that you know, the schedule is, TAB considered it last Wednesday. It comes again in November for an information item. It will be approved in, in December. And a couple things, well, two or three major things, major results came from it. One is that from the 6 scenarios, it was reduced to 2 and over programming, and I'll get in that section. Second, the discussion revolved around whether the over-programming funds, or the funds for over-programming, I should say, would be used to meet specific needs, such as trails, parks, or a project in Scott County. That was a second item that many TAB members felt strongly that Scott County, which was the only county not to get a project, that should be taken into consideration in the final analysis. And also MnDOT threw out a cautionary warning that, as you know, many of the regional solicitations projects are matched by local funds. MnDOT threw out a warning that because of COVID, state budget, there may not be those funds available. He didn't say they weren't, but it just may not be, and not to count on them. And the other major idea that was brought up was in the terms of roadway expansion or roadways versus bike and ped and trails. Many members noted that as part of roadway projects, bikes, trails, and parks are being affiliated with those projects. And so it was asked for a list of what parks and trail improvements were included in roadway plans, and also asked for was a historical distribution to the counties over since 2014. And one other, under the auspices of Director Thompson, an analysis of the recent bonding bill, what it provides for transportation, and comparing it and contrasting it with what is available in regional solicitation in those projects is available. Should you want that, I'm sure Director Thompson can get it to you, or just let Deb know, the Madam Chair, and I will send it to all of you. And lastly, the most favorite part is the agency reports. MnDOT is, as you can imagine, ahead of most everything. The snow season did slow it down, beginning of the snow season. The concrete on 35W North is ready to go. The airport only needs striping. 94 west of the Metro is just about complete, and the Min-Pass lane is just about complete. And finally, from the Metropolitan Airport Commissions, unfortunately, it's international flights down 95%, passengers down 61%. That's total passengers going through the airport, what they call enplaning. Domestic flights down 45%. Last year, in October 2019, 279,000 passengers were at the airport. This year, 93,000. And the CARES Act funds have been used for, have not been used for operations, so they still have them reserved. So it seems to be fiscally well run. And the last is the $15 minimum wage was approved for all airport workers, all workers at the airport starting January 1st. If you work at the MAC, a certain number of hours, you are covered, and it's the same schedule as Minneapolis. Thank you, Madam Chair. Questions? Thank you all.
Councilmember Chambliss.
Thank you for that very detailed and informative report, Mr. Dugan.
Thank you, Madam Chair, Vice Chair.
Yes. I understand that you guys want the list of the historical distribution of the roadway projects associated with parks and trails. I think that that's a very good question. And I think this committee could also benefit from seeing that information as well.
Okay. Thank you, Member Chambliss. Just so that I may have conflated two of them, the historical distribution would be to look at the last 6 years or so, how counties stacked up. In other words, how many projects Scott got, Hennepin, Ramsey, et cetera, to give us some balance, or to give us a broad view on, as you will, geographical balance. To your point that you recognize, the roadway, trails and parks, or trails portion, is to determine when a roadway is expanded particularly as expansion where there's sidewalks put on, or are there additional trails alongside them, and how do we know that and have an answer for you folks as to how that's happening, so that if Bike and Ped much money or something else, in fact they are getting money from a different source. I hope that clears it up. Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
And we can definitely get that information. We typically compile that information at the end of each regional solicitation so that we can look at things over a longer window of time, because depending on where development and building is happening, really sort of impacts that. And we do it both relative to geography and also each county's percentage of the population. So we get an understanding of how the money is going out into the different areas. So we can probably send you the last analysis, but that's a similar analysis will be performed after we do the regional solicitation awards in December. All right, any additional questions for Peter?
Thank you all.
Yeah, thank you, Peter. Much appreciated. Next, we're on to other reports. We have MTS Director Thompson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can.
All right. Just a schedule update following up on what Member DeGan said. We will give periodic updates to this committee of the regional solicitation over the next 2 months. TAB is going to make 2 more meetings before they recommend the slate of projects to this committee. And we'll share the information as we develop it for TAB. We'll also share it with you as interim so that you're seeing it as we go on. Also, the transportation policy plan, staff member Amy Venovitz sent that out to all council members last Wednesday after TAB made their recommendations. So we wanted to give you as much time to look through that as you could before we bring it back to this committee on, I think, November 9th. Because there's a lot in those documents. They're long, but we've linked it to the TAB agenda, which has all the track changes documents and different recommendations. So hopefully you find a little time to look through that. It's a lengthy document. A lot of changes that were based on the public input, and also just some text changes we wanted to make throughout the document. Let's see, other updates. Mention of the bonding bill. We've talked about the A or the B line and D line being funded, but there are numerous projects that received funding that the regional solicitation has funded or will fund it. So I think that's a great document that we can send out to this committee. It's across highways and pedestrian and bike trails. I think it really shows the linkage between bonding bill often and our regional solicitation and council funding. So it's a great for this region, that bonding bill, beyond just our DRT. Other updates today, the Governor's Blue Ribbon Committee on Governance and Transit met. The committee today heard presentations from groups representing that had formed opinions about what the governance model should be for the council. So they heard brief presentations. Each group was given up to 5 minutes presentation. And then there was time for questions from League of Minnesota Cities, the Citizens League, League of Women's Voters, Suburban Transit Providers, and Minnesota Intergovernmental County Association, and another member representing some of the suburban counties. So they gave a lot of those groups have already issued opinions, recommendations in the past. So they were updating the committee about their recommendations around appointment or election of council, non-elected officials or elected officials, allocation of funding, and other governance models. No decisions were made. It was just hearing from outside groups. This was the first kind of open public kind of representation to the committee. Next committee, they meet in 2 weeks. They'll start to try to get opinion from committee members about where they're at, because they only have a few meetings left where they have to come up with a list of recommendations. And I'll close a little bit on some positive COVID news. There isn't always very positive, but among our contractors, we had no positive tests last week. But also we've had, since the beginning of March, we've had 58 contractor employees test positive. And as of end of last week, all 58 have returned to work over that time frame. So they've all recovered enough to get back to work. So I consider that really good news on the contractors. So with that, Madam Chair, concludes my report. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Director Thompson. Any questions from council members? I just have a quick comment as you're reviewing the TPP. Amy and team did a really nice job of reflecting the public comments and sort of identifying what will feed into the 2050 plan versus things we could address in the interim. I think they did a really nice job of melding in all of the public comments in a way that I think we'll find useful both for this TPP, but even when we look forward to the 2050 regional guiding framework. So I think that will be very helpful. So definitely, I'm sure as you'll review it, feel free to reach out to Nick or Amy with any additional questions that you have. All right, so then, yep, on to General Manager Questra.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think Mr. Thompson set me up since I have to start with some bad COVID news. We have had a significant uptick of COVID cases among our employees. And since the last Transportation Committee, we've recorded an additional 37 cases for a total of 44 cases in October. I think this is aligned with what the state is experiencing and what the region is experiencing, but nevertheless alarming to us, of course. And to give you a sense, and because you've asked in the past for trend, since May, we had 27 in May cases, 11 in June, 11 in July, 27 in August, 18 in September, and now 44 so far this October. And I think we're on the 26th today. Yes, we are. So we have a couple of areas where we're starting to see clusters of cases. The East Metro garage has 11 confirmed cases this month. Reuters has 8 confirmed cases. We have many more out than that because as we do contact tracing, we ask others to get tested, or others say, I feel I need to get tested even though I don't meet the contact tracing requirements because I have a loved one at home or somebody at home who's particularly vulnerable, and we of course accommodate that. So 11 cases in East Metro is translating to 22 individuals gone. This is in our primarily in our maintenance area, and so that creates issues for us in how buses are maintained and ready for service. So we're doing a lot of shuffling of resources, and today it was reported to me that we got all trips taken care of, routes taken care of. There was some concern that we were going to have to back off some added trips beyond the normal schedule to that we had been providing on the 21. But my understanding in my most recent report is that we didn't have to do that. That we were able to shuffle around resources and buses from garage to garage in a way that we were able to accommodate. And of course, that work continues. We're also adding some barriers on some garages, so that some buses rather, so we have extra buses if we need to bring extra buses to certain garages because of their lack of ability to maintain. We're also trying to develop ideas on what we can do to protect our employees and protect our customers, and we're looking at strategies for how to encourage more mask wearing by both employees and riders, that range from communication to intervention to more of a presence on our operations, official presence. I've reported to you in the past, and I don't think this has changed, that more than 80%, when we did a review and a survey, more than 80% of our operators were compliant, and that doesn't include those that may not require masks because of certain conditions, and that we were seeing a similar number for our riders. But still, in a time when the COVID cases are peaking, we got to figure out what we can do to do better. So we're working hard on that. We met just actually earlier this afternoon on both communication strategies and again intervention strategies, both with the staff and with our riders, and we're certainly trying to do whatever we can to address the situation. I will also try to leave on a good, try to finish the report on a good note, and that is the Metro Transit Technicians Program celebration is tomorrow. We have 18 graduates, I believe is the number. I think we started out with 350 people who wanted to participate in that. So these are really elite people. Our elite graduates who've spent the last 2.5, 3 years in study and in practice and in internship and practice. And we have a great program, and it's really a really a nice event. And because this is really a worthwhile approach to how we recruit technicians, and I just couldn't be more proud of the program and more proud of our graduates. And want to encourage you. I think you all received a calendar appointment with the WebEx information, but just wanted to encourage you and remind you, if you want to attend that event, it takes place between 10 a.m. and 11 a.m. tomorrow, and we would love you to virtually attend if you can. So with that, Madam Chair, I'll leave myself open to questions.
Councilmember Cummings.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Coister, are you going to be repeating the training again? Is there another program set up?
Yeah, I think what we do is review what our need is by each area, because this is the bus technicians and we've had rail technicians, and I'm not sure when the next program is scheduled, but let me find that information out. It's a great question and get back to you. I wish I'd thought of it prior to the meeting and I'd have the answer for you.
Thank you.
Additional questions from council members? All right, thank you, Wes. All right, now we'll move on to our first order of business, which is the consent agenda. If there's no changes to the consent items, I would entertain a motion to approve the items on consent.
Chair Barber, I will make a motion to approve the items on consent agenda.
Moved by Councilmember Sterner. Is there a second?
Second by Chambliss.
Second by Councilmember Chambliss. Is there any other discussion? Seeing none, Becky, would you call the roll, please?
Chambliss.
Aye.
Cummings.
Aye.
Ferguson.
Aye.
Fredson.
Aye.
Gonzalez. Sterner.
Aye.
Zirin. Barber.
Aye. With that, the consent agenda is approved. Next, we move on to business item 2020-275, a same week item. It is Metropolitan Airport Commission Bus Garage and Facility Lease Agreement. And we have, I believe, Marilyn Porter and Claudia Toussaint here to speak.
Yes, Madam Chair, members of the committee, Marilyn Porter, Director of Engineering Facilities. I'm here to present business item number 2020-275, same week. Proposed action that the Metropolitan Council authorize the regional administrator to negotiate and execute a lease agreement with the Metropolitan Airport Commission for the South Garage facility in the amount of $10,941,576. By way of background, in 1980, Metro Transit completed construction of the South Garage facility as a leasehold improvement on land owned by the Metropolitan Airport Commission. It's a 40-year fixed term tenancy with MAC for the South Garage facility. That lease expires on November 30th, 2020. The annual rent was secured at a flat rate of $54,885 for the duration of the tenancy. The facility, and it's located at 2100 East 77th Street, and a map is attached, is used to store and maintain approximately 145 buses that serve 28 primarily north-south transit routes. We're looking to execute an agreement between Metro Transit and MAC. The purpose of extending the lease is for the continued use of the South Garage facility. The term of the lease is proposed for 10 years with one 5-year extension for a total of 15 years. Metro Transit would pay an annual building rent at a fair market rate of $408,164. The rent would increase annually based on the prior year's building rent plus 2.5%. Metro Transit would pay MAC ground rent in accordance with MAC Ordinance 121 at an annual cost of $241,494. Rationale: the South Garage is a very important facility. With the addition of the Orange Line, D Line, Southwest, and other future bus and rail lines, we will continue to need the facility for operations to support our transit needs. In addition, the facility is strategically located to operate key local bus routes serving South, East, and North Metro. We also have, it's located near the Mall of America Transit Center to operate high-frequency routes such as routes 5 and 54. And lastly, South Garage supports 35W all-day service and express routes for South Metro. In terms of the Thrive lens, South Garage supports routes that serve diverse and historically underserved communities. The lease extension supports continued service to these communities as it relates to equity. Stewardship and prosperity through needed facility space to support expanded bus service and transitway investments. Funding: the lease will be funded by the annual operating budget for Metro Transit. The total estimated lease cost for the first year of the lease term is $649,658. So with that, I'll stand for questions.
Thank you, Marilyn. Are there questions from council members? Councilmember Cummings.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Ms. Porter, I'm wondering, are we storing the same number of vehicles with this new lease as we were with the old lease? And is it expandable as it's pointed out in the business item with the additional routes and the additional vehicles and so forth? Are we looking to expand that location? Can it be, or where do we stand with that?
My understanding is we will house the same amount of buses that we do currently, and that's the 145, but that's fluid. Others may, to be perfectly honest, I don't know if that number will change or not, but right now it's perceived to be status quo.
Okay, thank you.
General Manager Koister, do you have a comment?
Yeah, Madam Chair, I would just say that the South Garage is really an important location to us, and we've talked about it before, that it's just ideally located for a number of routes and a number of services. So we see a really ongoing demand. In fact, we'd initially been pushing for a 20-year lease with the airports, with MAC, and we're now at really truly a 15-year lease, which is not as much as we wanted, but that just represents the importance of that garage to us, even in these sort of uncertain times. So I just wanted to point that out.
All right. Any additional questions from council members? Seeing none, I'd entertain a motion to approve business item 2020-275 same week.
So Fredson, I'm happy to move the staff recommendation.
Thank you. Moved by Fredson. Is there a second?
Cummings seconds.
Seconded by Cummings. Is there any other discussion? Hearing none, Becky, could you call the roll, please?
Chambliss.
Aye.
Cummings.
Aye.
Ferguson.
Aye.
Fredson.
Aye.
Gonzalez. Gonzalez. Sterner.
Aye.
Zirin. Barber.
Aye. With that, motion carries. Next, we move on to business item. Thank you very much. Business item 2020-276 is solid waste and recycling material removal. We have Jeff Freeman here. Welcome.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair. Thank you. Good afternoon, Madam Chair and committee members. My name is Jeff Freeman. I'm a senior project coordinator in engineering and facilities. Today, I'm bringing you business item 20-276 to authorize the regional administrator to award and execute a contract to Waste Management of Minnesota in the amount of $575,000. As this is a pay-for-service contract, we estimate the awarded amount will last approximately 36 months. The amount of the bid from Waste Management of Minnesota was $337,521.95. And as instructed in the bidding instructions, it only represented the cost to pick up the waste materials. The actual cost to dispose at a facility is to be a pass-through item billed to Metro Transit, as incinerator or landfill costs can vary by hauler, location, and availability on any given day. Historically, we have seen the annualized cost of this service go from approximately $160,000 a year to $260,000 a year in a little over 4 years. Contributing to that increase has been expanding the area of pickup with the startup of the ABRT lines, increased county and state fees for landfills, and overall expansion of service. The development of this RFP for bidding looked to optimize service through frequency and container size analysis, as well as a standalone project to install a compactor at Transfer Road. This is the location where all of our public waste is consolidated for collection. Given these efforts, the $575,000 amount requested in this contract represents an annual cost target of $190,000. Thank you for your consideration, Madam Chair and members. With that, are there any questions regarding this business item?
Thank you. Are there any questions from council members? Councilmember Sterner.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Yeah, what I was wondering about is with this new program with waste management, can you kind of describe, if any, are there any kind of recycling or organics opportunities in the structure of that being in place, if there are those type of things?
Yes, Madam Chair, Councilmember Sterner. We currently have single sort recycling at all of our facilities as required by law. We're picking up waste. We have begun a 3-bin system, which also includes organics, and that is currently being done at 4 of our facilities. We're looking to expand that into more facilities, and our original goal was to have that done by this time. However, COVID really has put a damper on our ability to get into the facilities and lay out where we're going to locate bins and work with on-site staff to do a real good job of that particular item. But that is within the contract. There are rates already established for those services. Thank you.
Thank you. Additional questions or comments from council members? All right, seeing none, I'd entertain a motion to approve business item 2020-276.
I would make a motion to approve the item.
Great, moved by Sterner. Is there a second?
Second by Chambliss.
Second by Chambliss. Is there any other discussion? Hearing none, Becky, could you call the roll, please?
Chambliss.
Aye.
Cummings.
Aye.
Ferguson.
Aye.
Fredson.
Aye.
Gonzalez. Sterner.
Aye.
Zirin. Barber.
Aye. With that, the motion carries. Thank you, Jeff.
Thank you.
So that concludes our business for today. I would propose that that the 2 items on consent, even though they are same week items. Before I do that, I'll note that Councilmember Gonzalez noted in the notes that he did vote aye for that last business item. I would propose that even though the 2 items on consent are same week items, that they move on consent to council. They went consent through tab and through us, so that seems to make sense. And then I would say business item 2020-276 could also move on consent, with the same week item under non-consent being on our full agenda on Wednesday, if everyone agrees. All right, hearing no disagreement, we'll go with that. Now we're on to our information items. So our first information item is Southwest Corridor Light Rail Transit Expansion Cash Flow. And we have Marie Henderson. Welcome, Marie.
Thank you, Madam Chair and committee members. My name is Marie Henderson, and I am the acting CFO, and here to present the brief overview of the Southwest Corridor Light Rail Transit Expansion, the Cash Flow Financing Plan. On the next slide is 5 items that I'll be overviewing tonight for your information. We will do some reporting requirements and show you those, who and refresh those of you for the full funding sources for the Southwest project, the FFGA, which is the Federal Funding Grant Agreement, the funding status of that. We're going to look at some projected cash flow balances, and then issuing possibly some grant anticipation notes, and what does that mean. So on the next slide, This is for information today at the Transit Committee, but coming on Wednesday, October 28th to the Management Committee, they'll actually see a formal business item with the following 4 action items. And the first action item within this business item is asking the use of general obligation or revenue grant anticipation notes. We're asking that they will be various dates and in various amounts to provide cash to cover expenses for the Southwest Light Rail project. This is, of course, pending receipt of the federal grant payments, and separately present each GAN's issuant resolution to the council for approval. We will ask, and we'll talk a little bit later about the GANs and why we need to issue these general obligation revenue grants, and how much money we're looking at that and the projected use for that project. The second item in this business item that is going forward to management is that we have a policy here at the council that we have to follow whenever funds go negative. We call it some internal investment pool borrowing, that any amount over $10 million or greater than 3 months, we need approval for that. And again, a little bit later on in this presentation, I'll show you when we anticipate going negative on this project. But we're looking at about a $60 million deficit at one point during the project. So that's why the business item going forward will ask that and allow us to go negative. Now, the third point of that business item is when we go negative, and it's an internal fund, there's interest on that money, and that interest needs to be paid basically internally back for the fund. And that business item will also talk about how we'll use our arbitrage fund in transit. And it's a debt fund that when we do bonding, we have to bond for 105%. So that extra money is sitting in that arbitrage fund. It also covers expenses that if we don't spend the money basically fast enough, we actually have some penalties that we pay. So it covers that, and it will also cover the expenses or the interest expected on this internal borrowing. And the fourth point that will be coming forward through this business point is that we should do some periodic updates, not only to the management committee where the financing is approved and then through the council, but also through the transportation committee here to show where we are at in the funding for the Southwest project. So if we go to the next slide, the next slide is the refresher on the $2 billion project for the Southwest line, that 46.86% will be funded through the federal government, and the remaining will come from local funding. Listed here are the local funding sources, and I know there's a lot of abbreviations on here, so just to refresh people of Hennepin County, but then also the the County Transportation Improvement Board, HICRA, the Hennepin County Regional Railroad Authority. We have some financing through motor vehicle sales tax, the state of Minnesota. And for the collaborative piece of that, that makes up money that we have received in from the city of St. Louis Park, Eden Prairie, Minnetonka, and Hopkins. Also, in addition to that, is the Hennepin County Environmental Response Fund and Community Works. That is what makes up the complete funding for this project. On the next slide, the FFGA, which again is the federal grant award, was actually signed by both parties completely on September 14th. And with this funding will come over a 10-year period. When we've done light rail projects in the past, the funding has actually come in a little bit sooner than 10 years, but these are the amount of money that we can draw each year provided by that grant agreement. The way we draw that money is that the council has to pay the vendors. Then the council can submit for reimbursement into the FTA. So really what this comes down to is the timing of our cash flow. Since the project will not be built over 10 years, it will be completed sooner than that, and our contractors need to be paid sooner than that. That's where the GANs funding comes into play. So Greg, as you just click onto the next slide, just click once. And then just once more. This is going to be a very, very small grid, and I do not expect anybody to read the numbers. Just know that this is for a 10-year plan of cash. And if you click just once more, Greg, you'll see a red line that comes in. This red line is symbolic of if we do not do any GANs funding. The lowest point of this will negative cash project will be in 2022 with an estimated negative $542 million in cash. So if we can click just one more time, and we'll see a blue line come in, and that blue line shows us that if we do issue our GANs, that our lowest point, like I've talked about earlier, is at 60 million, which would then be covered by internal financing and cover us then to the end of the 10-year project and break even. Now, of course, this is an estimate of our cash flows. As we go through the years, we will be able to estimate our costs tighter, and running it out 10 years is our best estimate at this point. So one more slide, and this talks about our GANs. We do have one that we're working on currently. That is the 2020 C issuance. We are going out for our bonding calls next week in hopes that we receive the funding and people will bid on that bond, and we will have cash hopefully in hand by December 22nd, 2020. The 2020 C is the way we issue our bonds here at the council. We've already issued bonds A and B earlier this year for parks and environmental services. So that's just why it's 2020 C. It's just a naming convention. And for our estimated cash flow, we are asking for 125 million on that. There is a formula for how much we can issue on these short-term GANs. They usually run for a 3-year payback period. And overall, right now, with the current cash flow of what we're looking at, if we do 3 or 4 GANs issuance, we're still looking at about $760 million for bond issuance. So the next slide just summarizes the 2 business items that will be going to Management Committee, and then on the 28th, and then the following council meeting for formal approval. But tonight we just really wanted to present to you this in an information item. And then on the next slide, there are other people on this call that are available for questions.
Okay, questions from council members. Councilmember Cummings.
Thank you, Madam Chair. What kind of interest rates are you expecting on these issuances?
Yes, Madam Chair and committee members, when we bring that business item, we have to set parameters within that resolution, so it would not go above 2.25%. Most likely around 1.5% is what we'll get.
Councilmember Cummings.
Thank you.
I think you're reading my mind. Yeah.
Can you remind me what the interest rates were on the 2020 A and B?
A really good question. I know they were less than 1%, but I don't know off the top of my head. They were very, very low when we issued back in May.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, additional questions from council members? Okay, if you think of any, because this is does get somewhat complicated, please reach out to Marie or Jim, and they'll be more than happy to kind of run through things. But I don't know. I'm excited that we're at the point that we're talking about GANs. So I'll take that at least at this point. So with that, I'll just say thank you, Marie. Appreciate it. And council members, feel free to reach out if you do come up with any additional questions.
Thank you.
Thank you. So next we're on to our last information item, which is a listening and learning summary. We've got Robin Kaufman and Eric Lind here.
Excellent. Thank you, Madam Chair and committee members. I'm Robin Kaufman. I'm the Director of Administration for Metro Transit, and I have with us today, we also have Eric Lind, who's the Manager of Analytics and Research. So we're going to kind of tag team as we go through this presentation, and it looks like we have some time afterwards for some questions too. So I'm excited about that. We're going to talk a little bit about an engagement process called Listening and Learning Through Crisis. We're going to talk a little bit about, can we go to the next slide? Thank you. We are going to talk a little bit about why we engaged and how we engaged our riders, and then also talk a little bit about what we learned and then how we're using this data. And then Eric is actually going to demo the tool that we actually have online. So he's going to go through and do a demonstration of that at the end of this presentation. Next slide, please. So to talk a little bit about why we did this, we had, as you all know, we had a lot of projects that were in the works. We did a lot of engagement, especially around projects like Network Next in 2019. And with all of the crises that have hit this year, we really just felt that we needed to take a pause and ask our riders and the communities that we serve, especially those by our core routes, just take pause and ask them, have your needs changed? Have your priorities changed? And also, what's the best way to communicate with you? There's, been challenges, especially with in-person meetings, so really what's the best way that we can engage with people? So we also wanted to gather this information because we know we do have a lot of other projects coming up. And, oops, a second. Sorry about that. And so we wanted to, just see with the upcoming projects, what's the best way to engage people. Next slide, please. So we set a goal of engaging 1,000 people. We thought that was actually pretty aggressive, and we really wanted to make sure that the responses that we received were reflective of our riders, which is 45% Black, Indigenous, or people of color, and that's based on our pre-COVID travel behavior inventory study that showed that 45% roughly are BIPOC community. So we wanted to make sure that we were trying to reflect that in our responses. So again, not knowing what was going to necessarily work in this time, we tried a lot of different strategies. We had a website that we posted online. It was also translated into several languages. We did emails. We did an article on our website called Riders Almanac. We tried a lot of different things with social media. We worked with a few local ethnic media, including KMOJ, Spokesman Recorder, and Beta East Sabor, where we published a paid article, as well as ads and social media. And then we also spent a lot of time, I think we had 28 shifts where we had staff actually go out to some of our busy transit centers, bus stops, and LRT stations, and we surveyed people in person and just had some conversations with them. we were pretty pleased. We found that people were really eager and interested in talking to us at those locations. We also reached out to a lot of our community groups that we work with on a lot of our projects. We reached out to at least 75, and we did have a few of them, about a dozen, that said that they'd be willing to, either promote our social media or repost, or maybe include a little blurb in one of their newsletters. And then we did have 5 that said that they were willing to have us come to an upcoming event or meeting that they already had scheduled. Next slide, please. So I'm pleased to report that we actually received over 1,800 responses. 1,400 of those responses were online, and about 400, a little over 400 were in person. And we nearly achieved our goals with the BIPOC, with 41% BIPOC community, 51% white. And so you can see on the right side of the slide, the bottom pie chart is showing what the breakdown of our pre-COVID ridership by race and ethnicity. And then the top is showing the listening and learning, what we achieved through listening and learning, and a breakdown of race and ethnicity. And for the most part, we achieved pretty comparable to what our pre-COVID ridership was. I think the one slight difference was in the Black African American community. The pre-COVID riderships in about, if I recall, about 22%, and in the listening and learning, we achieved about 19%. So next slide, please. We also wanted to make sure that we were hearing from voices, the voices that in the areas that we serve by transit. So we asked, when we did our surveys, we asked for zip codes. And so you can see here that we did achieve the geographic representation that we were targeting. The areas in green in the core center, those are showing areas that we had over 40 people per zip code. And then you can see it kind of tapers out as you go out into the region. So we were able to hear from a lot of the voices in our local and suburban core local service routes areas. Next slide, please. And so just a quick overview of what we learned. First of all, the demographics and responses differ significantly between online and in person. And Eric's going to go over a few slides that actually show some of these differences. We learned that we do need to use multiple strategies to make sure we engage a diverse community. We can't just do a survey and post it online and think that we're going to get a sample that's reflective of our ridership. And then we found some strategies were more effective than others. We did do some paid promoted ads on Facebook, for example, and we had 6,000 views, which you're thinking that's pretty great, but we only had about 40 click-throughs. So of those 60,000 people, 40 people clicked through, and then SurveyMonkey wasn't able to tell us if we actually received a survey from those. On the other hand, we did a paid ad and a paid article in Spanish on Vida y Sabor, on both their print media as well as their social media and their website. And that actually resulted in 150 surveys that were completed in Spanish. So we were very pleased with that response rate. And then as I mentioned, what we found is that the community just doesn't have a lot of capacity for special meetings. People were very eager and willing to talk to us when we kind of met them where they're at bus stops and shelters. But as far as doing formal structured meetings, there isn't that capacity there right now. And so next slide, please. I think, Eric, I'm going to turn it over to you here if you want to take it from here.
Sure. Thanks, Robin. Madam Chair and council members. So I'm just going to go over a few data representations from what we saw, and some of these you may have seen in the committee of the whole presentation the other night, but there's additional detail in here as well. So the first is just showing that when we look at the method we used to talk to people, there are clear differences in the self-identification and race ethnicity of the respondents. So on the left is the race ethnicity identified by people who we talk to in person. And that green color there represents Black or African American identity. blue representing white. And what you can see, of course, is that there's over 50% of the people we talk to on the street, in the bus stations and transit centers, identified as Black or African American. Whereas if we look at the online sample, it was a much lower number, less than 10%. Whereas the majority of respondents, or plurality at least, of identified respondents identified as white. There's also a great deal of non-response, so 25% didn't respond at all. And it has been seen in other areas of research that a lot of non-response to this particular question is commonly seen in people who would otherwise identify as white. So we basically don't have a lot of confidence that, as Robin mentioned, if you put a survey online, you're going to get a response that, in terms of race ethnicity, is representative of our overall ridership. Next slide, please. The text is a little small here, but what we did was we asked what people would be willing and able to do, whether they thought they're very willing and able, or just willing and able but not preferred, or not willing at all or able at all. And those outreach strategies were things like online focus groups and presentations, which are the first two rows up there. And you can see pretty even split between very willing, able in blue, and not at all willing in orange. By the time you get to the third and fourth rows, the online surveying and online feedback, those are much more popular. So for this group, which was the online respondents, they were very much in the mode of being able to engage with things through website or other media. Then as you skip down to the bottom three rows, the first two of those are about in-person meetings hosted by Metro Transit or a community partner. And not surprisingly, fewer than 20% of the respondents were saying they're very willing and able to attend in-person meetings. And I don't think that that's something that we're going to be seeing anytime soon. So it sort of reinforced that message in terms of what channels we use. Finally, the bottom row is hosted conference call or town hall by phone. And we've had suggestions that this is actually a very good way to reach people. And in this, again, online respondent group, it looked like that was not a very popular option. So there was, 40% or more of people were saying they're not at all willing or able to attend a town hall by phone. So that's interesting to keep in mind as we look at some other data later on about what people said who we talked to in person. Next slide, please. And then this is the summary of the priorities that we heard from people. Again, the main strategy here was to ask people based on what we had heard over the years. Most recently in 2018, we had a very widespread customer survey, both digitally and paper surveys on our buses and trains, asking people how they rated us for lots of different aspects of our service. And we took the 5 or 6 most important of those concepts, and most important as identified by our own riders. In other words, the things that they thought were very important in those customer surveys, we asked them again and said kind of, are these still the main things that you're worried about as you think about transit, during COVID or after George Floyd and everything else that's happened? So we asked them about whether they felt safe or secure while on board a bus or a train. That rose to the top in the in-person conversations. Also, the second highest kind of always has been important in online respondents. On-time performance, so the bus or train is on time, is the second highest from in-person, and is sort of the highest always important in online. And then kind of interestingly, if you look on that right-hand side there, the red shading indicates places where things are more important to people now than they used to be. So that the one that has the biggest red section there is vehicles have enough room for me to ride comfortably. So that's an indication that this issue that may not have been a priority for a lot of riders up until March is now probably sensibly a really important priority, and maybe in a different way. And that's something we can look at as well as we get into kind of the free text part of our survey results. So next. And this is just something that I think we'll be able to show you if we get to the interactive app, but what we're able to do is kind of cross these questions with other questions we asked about how often people are riding. For instance, people who are riding now during COVID, you can look at people who are riding almost every day. So these would be a lot of people that we encountered on in the intercept surveys, but also people that responded online. So people that are riding every day are concerned about safety and security on board, and they prioritize on-time performance of vehicles being on time. Those are kind of the two big responses there. And kind of in a more distant third place is that vehicles are clean, which is obviously another concern during COVID. So, but this is just an example of how we can kind of facet the data, as we say, or cross different concepts together to get a little deeper picture of what people are thinking about, especially those who are riding right now. Next, please. We asked a lot of open-ended comments. So along with each of those ratings or priorities, we asked people, what comments do you have about that? And so we got a lot of responses, hundreds and hundreds of responses where people were typing in or communicating through conversation, whatever it was that was on their mind about being on time or being safe. And so we're able to then pull these up and filter them, search them. And there's an example here of a search bar in the top right with filled in with 21. So people looking for Route 21 concepts with relation to on-time performance. And so our service development planners have actually been doing this, going through and looking at different routes and comments that people have raised, whether it's about on time or whether it's about being safe or clean. So it's going to be a resource for people throughout the agency to understand how their work is perceived by our riding public right now. Next, please. So Robin, I don't know if you want to summarize kind of how we're using it and what's next.
Sure. Thank you, Eric, and Madam Chair and committee members again. We've presented this this tool and this information to all of our internal departments and a lot of staff. A lot of departments are already kind of diving into it and seeing what they can learn and how they can apply it to their 2021 planning activities. Some examples that Eric had mentioned, you know, you can query by routes. I know service development has actually had 3 planners that are going through and looking at some of this feedback by routes and by comments, just to see if they can find some themes, and they're starting to draft some summaries of what they've learned. So you can, like I said, you can do it by keywords and routes, and look at it by different demographics as well. So super excited about this. Again, departments have it, and we just published this to our external website. So if you do go to the metrotransit.org/outreach, there's a little summary. There's this a PDF of this presentation, and then there's actually kind of a simplified tool that people can hopefully go to and look at the data themselves and kind of query it, and hopefully if you know, if our public and our riders look at it, they see themselves and reflected in there as well. So I think we could pause for questions now, or Madam Chair, should we have Eric go through, do a demo of the tool?
I would love to show a demo of the tool. It is so very cool, and I want the rest of you to see it.
Absolutely. I think Eric is going to share his screen.
Yes, Madam Chair, I'm glad you're excited about the tool. Give me a quick thumbs up if you can see that website then. Thanks, Robin. Okay, so what essentially we've done is, and this is the public one that's linkable from that outreach webpage on metrotransit.org that Robin mentioned. What we've done is taken all of the responses and put them into a little interactive website that hopefully is pretty intuitive. I recognize that we probably do need to add a little bit of a splash page, but right now this is what you see when you land, which is The survey itself is pretty much implemented on the left-hand side here. So we ask people about their needs, their priorities, and values by having them rate these concepts, which again were the main concepts out of the customer surveys, and rate them as very important, and they always have been important, more important than they used to be, less important than they used to be, and sort of not important at all and never has been important. And so you can see the basic responses for each one. So the bus and train is on time, very high rating. If you hover over it, you can see, the number of responses and the percents of responses. You can also view it just by percentages. So there's a lot of little buttons and tools you can play with here to get the exact answer you want. So this is divided into the online survey, which is here, and I'll go through a little bit more in a minute. The in-person conversations, which are similar but slightly different because of how we had to structure the in-person conversations. We essentially weren't able to deploy the full kind of 25 question survey that we were doing online while people were waiting for the bus. So what we try to do is have conversations and structure them around these same ideas and then kind of summarize them on the back end. So the data look a little different. And then also this response map that Robin showed before, where in this version you can zoom in and click in on the different zip codes and it'll pop up and tell you how many responses were recorded from each area. Okay, so going back to the survey, again, you can go through and check and uncheck different questions, understand how important or not important people felt those to be, and the needs, priorities, and values. Of course, you can also do things like filter the data. And so we have a number of the demographic identifiers where people self-identified as yes or no, I have a disability, self-identified gender, self-identified race, ethnicity. And we also ask them about their income and age group as well. So any of these kind of identifiers, you can kind of deselect and then select certain groups and see if your responses change drastically when you do that. So that's a powerful thing you can use. I also just want to point out, even though it says write in comments down here, the data behind this particular website contains no comments at all. Unfortunately, it's not really easy to just post all the comments that people made because they'd have to probably be redacted and somewhat cleaned up from the point of view of people just being free in their thoughts and what they write. It's not always appropriate to just post that as is. So instead, we've just gone with the quantitative data and tried to summarize some of those thoughts in the reporting as well. Okay, so the other really cool thing, and maybe one of the best things you can do with these interactive tools is to kind of cross questions together, as I mentioned. So let me just click on feeling safe and secure while on board, because we know that was something that is both very important to a large number of people and has become more important during COVID times. We can actually kind of look at whether that's true across all different types of riders or whether that's sort of different for different people. So for instance, if I wanted to look at it by age, you could click on those two questions. And the first way it displays is sort of not the way I want it. So I'm going to click this swap axis here. So now what it's showing us is age on this horizontal axis here, the age bins that people responded, and then their response to the question, how do you rate feeling safe and secure while on board a bus or train in terms of its importance? And in this case, what you can see is that as you get older respondents, they tend to have a higher propensity to respond with it being very important and always has been. Okay, so one way to interpret this, and again, there are still plenty of people that are concerned in the younger age groups and always have been. They also have a higher degree of people who are saying it's more important than it used to be. Okay, so feeling safe and secure on board is important across age groups, as you can see, but sort of how they come to that conclusion is a little bit different. And for many younger folks, it's maybe more important than it used to be. So that's one example of kind of putting two questions together to get a little bit more insight. We had a specific question about this, I think the other night, about disability status. So again, people self-identified as whether they had a disability or not. And looking at in this way, if we look at feeling safe and secure on board versus disability, there really isn't much difference. There's a slight increase in people who say it's very important and always has been, but I wouldn't consider that to be too meaningful. Looks pretty similar. So these are the kinds of questions we can answer. I think the last thing I want to show you before I kind of just open it up is in the in-person conversations. So again, we had the priorities that were kind of binned rather than asked about independently. We had a kind of an open-ended question. What are your priorities now? And staff were able to kind of bin these together either during the conversation or afterwards. But I want to talk a little bit about what Robin mentioned about how we get in touch with people. And so we asked both online survey and in person, like, how have you connected with us at Metro Transit? How have you in the past done that? And we also asked people to share their comments about those, but just showing you the kind of quantitative. For the in-person survey respondents, the highest response was actually a phone call to our Transit Information Center, our Customer Relations Center. And the second highest being visiting our website. But the reason I think this is important is because this is in contrast to that result we saw in the slide deck where people who are filling out the online survey preferred to do online interaction, online surveys, and that sort of thing, and did not prefer phone call town halls, for instance. Whereas I'd characterize this in-person group as being very willing to reach out by phone. So maybe that's an indication that, again, when we're thinking about these multiple channels of communication and engagement, there may be a difference in who you get in the online survey and who you get in this in-person, not in-person, but telephone town hall. It may just be that we have to do both. And that just might be, kind of the way forward when you think about trying to get representativeness in all of our engagement efforts. And I'll just point out that, there were some people that said they did online surveys, but of the people we talked to in person, it was very few who actually said they did those. So again, it's just the lesson here is that there are lots of different types of people on our system, and we have to reach out to them where they're at, and that means different strategies. So I think with that, I might pause and ask if there are questions on this interactive viewer or anything else I can try to answer for you.
Thank you very much. Councilmember Cummings.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This is really fascinating. It's going to be really fun to play with and see what you came up with. That's pretty amazing. I guess my question, I have a couple questions. Given the importance of the information that came out of this, are you intending to do this again? And also given the time in our changing climate and where we are today, which is very different than where we were, a year ago, and it will be ongoing for some period of time. It would be interesting and I think very informative to do this with some regularity and on some regular basis. If you are going to, this seems to me also an area where connecting through various groups, through using the council, using us as a resource would be really, really valuable. I mean, it just seems that we could connect with you, the data collectors, with various groups that we have a relationship with that might make those people much more willing to share information and participate when they get a personal invitation from somebody or we have a connection with them. So I'm just wondering kind of what your thoughts are on that going forward.
Sure. Thanks, Madam Chair and Council Member. Absolutely, we are taking a lot of what we learned and applying some of these methods as we do our engagement for Network Next, as we did our phase 2 and phase 1, and now starting to do our planning for phase 2. And then we've got a lot of projects coming up in 2021. So we're working on kind of applying what we've learned. And we are asking some of those same questions, like when we have surveys, we are always including demographic information and asking questions, if people are current riders or not. So we're able to do this kind of tool. Eric's already built another one for the Network Next, where we're able to kind of do the same level of analysis and looking at it by different demographic groups. So definitely, we haven't really talked specifically about whether or not we wanted to go back out, next spring or something and just say, how things have changed again. That might actually be a good thought to do, to just see if things have changed or as people have kind of adjusted and all. And as far as offer to utilize council members, absolutely, we're happy to do that, and I can work with Hannah and Peter on that, and let them know we're doing this kind of engagement, and always eager to have more assistance and connecting with more outreach staff or outreach and community groups. So
Great, thank you.
All right, additional questions or comments from council members?
Yeah, I have one.
Councilmember Chambliss.
Thanks for the information. I was glad to see that you're sharing your learnings with other staff, and just kind of looking at what the learning is and expanding on that. When on page 4, it says that you reached out to 75 community groups, 12 agreed, and then 5 actually allowed you to or attended community events or virtual meetings. I'm sure you've learned some information from that too. Do you plan on looking at where, you've learned that we still need to do a better job, and is it in reaching out to the different community groups, and if so, how? That's one question. And then secondly, on the communication and engagement and how people share their ideas, which is kind of what you're showing us right now, I was curious about the high level of respondents on phone calls on the website. Wondering if there's a different level of motivation for phone calls and websites. I just have a theory that people are kind of motivated because they are excited about something or upset about something, so they might want to call and talk to customer relations, which would contribute to the high count versus where people are present at different meetings or where they've seen the survey. So, but it's very interesting information.
yeah, Madam Chair and Council Member, trying to think of which to take first. As far as what we've learned as far as engaging community groups, I think one of the things we learned is, first of all, that a lot of them, at least in the August timeframe, a lot of them a lot of them weren't even holding their own meetings. A lot of them had canceled a lot of their board meetings, and a lot of these community groups were a lot of like the neighborhood associations, the district councils, that sort of thing. So they were either not holding their meetings, or they were just their agendas were so full already because they were doing things that were being responsive to community needs. So they just didn't have the space for us. I think the one thing we learned is that we need to allow at least 2 to 3 months time, like to reach out to them, to let them know that we're working on something, and then to try to get on their agenda, for a few meetings out. And so that's actually something that we're already starting to look at for the Network Next, where we're going to be doing some engagement in December and January. And so actually was just talking with the outreach staff today about starting to reach out to some of their community groups and seeing if we can maybe get on their agendas in that time frame. The other thing we learn, of course, is relationships are really, really important. And so I'm actually just in the process of restructuring the outreach staff. I've just reclassified three staff, and so we now have a team of 6 outreach coordinators, and we're reassigning them by geographic areas. And so instead of being by project, they're going to be assigned by geographic area, which really allows them to build a relationship. And in some communities, especially like in South Minneapolis, where you've got the D line, the B line, and a lot of projects, you could have 3 outreach coordinators working with you. So by doing this, each community will have their point of contact, and that person will carry through with all the projects. And I think that hopefully will help too, because if you have a different person dropping in every month or every 6 months, it's really hard to build that relationship and that trust. And so I think that'll be a big help in going forward with some of these projects in 2021.
So, Madam Chair and Councilmember, I'll just respond also to the question about this data we're looking at here, and in terms of how people have gotten in touch with us. I think you're absolutely right. People are mostly calling transit information to get a trip plan or customer relations. 90% of the time people call to raise an issue, but sometimes a commendation. But I think the main thing that I was taking from this was, as we presented these different ways of talking to Metro Transit, online surveys was not very popular. These other times and places where people could, give us feedback were not something that people have done very often. So, in contrast to the online version, where there's a lot more experience with not only calling the center, but also responding through online tools. So I think that was kind of one of the main things to take away.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions or comments? I just have Francisco, did you have a comment? Okay, I think this is just great information. I really think it was a great way to highlight how you have to target people out in the communities from different perspectives to be able to get good quality data. And then I just learned about how you're splitting up the outreach coordinators, which I think is really smart. I know we do that with our sector reps in the planning and CD, community development, and that makes a big difference because those relationships actually go a long way, I think, to help facilitate communication between us and the community. So I think that's fantastic to hear. So, all right, I'll give it one last shout out. Any other questions or comments from council members?
Chair Barbara, just as kind of a segue on what we talked about, but part of the equity issue, I believe, is geographically. Like I'm looking at my District 15, I have 4 cities. It looks like we have 17 responses. So some ways it's a chicken and egg using the services, but also getting the impact of what they have and not have. And I like kind of what you talked about geographically balanced, because that would help working with the cities in the different areas, maybe the schools in the district and that, where we get more responses by having that person really know how to get the responses out in the geographic areas for better and consistent service. And
Councilmember Stern, I'm guessing that part of that is reflective of a big part of your district is served by MVTA versus Metro Transit, but they may have connections into Metro Transit system that, whether from some other route that they may land, but I'm guessing that might be part of what you see on the screen.
Okay, but I even look at Inver Grove Heights, for example, which is pretty close to St. Paul. They're pretty low response rate as well. So, right, thank you.
Thank you. Other questions or comments from council members?
Chair, Councilmember Fredson here.
Yep, Councilmember Fredson.
Yeah, just real quick to echo your compliments for the presentation both last Wednesday and today. And I think it's really critical that we are, taking a deep dive on our data, making sure that it is representative across the board. And I would sort of tack on the question or concern related to geographic representation, especially just given the role of the Met Council and looking at that map. There are parts of the metro that really don't have responses, and so just any steps we can take to whether it's, I know you don't want to sort of manipulate the outcome of data collection, right? But set up some safeguards to ensure that we're getting adequate responses. And then the other question I had was related to whether or not we've considered building any kind of models around this kind of work. So just kind of factoring in all of the different kind of demographics you could tack on, whether or not it would be possible. I guess the question is, have we considered building models? Or do you anticipate that we would just continue to move forward in sort of a voluntary participation and then presentation of what we collect versus building something that's even more accurate, but also way more complicated?
So if you guys want to comment about the geography first and then the modeling, might be good.
Okay.
Eric, do you want to?
Sure. I mean, yeah.
Okay.
Thank you, Madam Chair and council members. So we could definitely, what we did, as Robin mentioned, this time was set particular targets for race, ethnicity, and kind of overall response. We did not set geographic targets per se. We just wanted to make sure we kind of had a balance. We, in future surveys, I mean, that's something you could definitely do, and especially thinking about the social media geo-targeting type tools where you could show, you know, if we're running low in Northwest Metro, whatever it might be, to show that survey for a few more days in that area is something that's actually possible with social media tools. So something that's a good suggestion. As far as statistical modeling, that's like really close to my heart. I'm very excited that you mentioned that. We have done that before with the customer survey in 2018. We used what we know about the transit onboard survey data as being really kind of robust statistically and weighted the customer data to that. So it kind of matched. You can use some techniques to do that. In this case, we had such a good match, at least from the race ethnicity standpoint again, with the overall community that we didn't feel like we needed to do that weighting. But that's definitely something we can do in other surveys where if we do fall a little bit short. And essentially the idea is, you know, take the data you have and kind of have people stand in for more people than we were able to actually talk to. But that's a great suggestion, and it is one of the tools that we have in our toolbox.
And just a real quick follow-up.
Go ahead.
Yeah, so then of course, when you do that kind of weighting, you get a sense of what's the margin. What are your conclusions that are totally, validated by the data set, and you know, where do you have a margin of error where you're, you know, absolutely confident in the outcome versus where you're just not as confident. But thank you for all of your work on this.
Thank you.
Great. Any other questions or comments? All right. Oh, Councilmember Chambliss. Sorry, I'm not seeing all of you on the screen, so don't hesitate to pipe up.
Yeah. No, I was just kind of listening to Chris Fredson's questions about the modeling and a margin of error and things like that. When I think there's a volume consideration as well with modeling and margins of error versus kind of getting informed about and getting a feel for what your customers are thinking. Sometimes that's, depending upon how you want to use that information, is more important than margin of error, especially when, let's say we're not able to disaggregate all the data, or we're not, people aren't comfortable, self-identifying in certain circumstances. So it seems to me like this is kind of more informative versus statistically significant, especially when you're trying to get ethnic data.
Madam Chair and Councilmember, that was very much the case, and especially with the in-person, as Eric mentioned, we weren't able to ask all 25 questions when we were trying to intercept people at the transit stops, and it was more just having a conversation and being able to complete, just to get some of those stories. And it was just I think I covered at least 3 shifts, and it was just really meaningful to just talk directly to our customers and our riders and hear some of the stories directly, what they've been going through for the last 6 months.
Okay, any additional questions or comments?
Oh, sorry, I forgot I was on mute.
Go ahead, Councilmember Canvas.
No, I was going to say, and sometimes it's good for people to be able to talk about what they've been going on for the last 6 to 8 months. you know.
Yeah, Madam Chair and Council Member, when we were looking to recruit some staff, a lot of the concern was, oh, what if no one wants to talk? And I think of the 40 people that I intercepted, I only had one person that just said, nope, I don't have time, and walked on. But almost everybody was eager to just have that conversation, especially if they're waiting for the transfer. So.
Mm-hmm. Well, any other questions, comments from council members? Well, thank you, Robin and Eric. Clearly there's interest in the data and we're looking forward to seeing it more. Thank you for putting the tool out there, because I think we could further this conversation amongst council members as we go forward of how this should impact change, especially as we're responding to how we bring back service relative to COVID, and as we're looking at the network next work. So I'm glad to hear you're working integrated well with that as well, because I think it'll be very informed. I just want to thank council members for a very good discussion. I think that that's the kind of feedback that Robin and Eric can use, and then hopefully that we can use as we're starting to look at how we integrate it into our planning. So thank you very much. So, all right. Anything else from council members tonight? If not, that's the end of our agenda. So thank you all, and we can be adjourned. Have a good evening.